Right. Hello, everybody. I'm Kiralee.
And I'm Christina.
And we are your ASBN hosts for today's extremely interesting talk by Alex. We want to acknowledge that we're on Kaurna land, and Kaurna land is the traditional land for the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, who we of course pay our respect to, and we pay our respect to the elders, both past and present. And we also respect their spiritual relationship with their country. And we respect the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Adelaide region. And we know that their cultural and heritage beliefs are of continuing importance, of course, to the Kaurna people living today. And we also extend our respect to other Aboriginal language groups and other First Nations people that cross this land and who may be visiting or crossing the land upon which we are holding this event. So, Christina.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Great. So I'll welcome our presenter today, who is Alex Sear, and the Director and Building Revitalisation Lead at ADP Consulting. He's also the author of the white paper that we'll be learning about today, which is called Think, Transforming Towers from Commercial to Living. Alex will also be sharing some case studies of successful adaptive reuse from commercial to residential. So please take it away, Alex.
All right, so welcome to the presentation. It's all about converting commercial offices to living, and that living can be anything from build to sell to build to rent to aged care to assisted living. And it's really a reaction to commercial being a bit dead since COVID, and also we're in the midst of a housing crisis. So why not solve two problems at once by converting them and using a lot less embodied carbon, because the majority of embodied carbon in a build comes from the actual structure. So who we are really quickly is ADP, which does have an Adelaide office. I'm based in Melbourne, but I do work nationally, and the Melbourne ESD team of 20 supports the Adelaide office, and our Adelaide director, Will, who couldn't be here, he actually is our Southern region lead. So we're very much beholden to his plans to expand more into Adelaide. So you've effectively got a large ESD team working here, but we're very proudly Australian owned. We're probably the largest building designer consultancy from an engineering standpoint that is still Australian owned and hasn't been bought out by a multinational, which we're quite proud of. And we've got offices all around Australia, and in London we just expanded overseas, which is great for an Australian company. We do all the building services, so mechanical, electrical, fire protection, hydraulics, sustainability, which we'll talk about, but we also do structures and a bunch of specialist items as well, but I won't bore you with that too much. And I'll get on to the presentation. So commercial offices, there's a lot of mega trends impacting commercial offices at the moment. And these are 7 of the key ones we see, which seem to be resonating throughout Australia. Corporate targets, a lot of the commercial assets which exist at the moment aren't aligned to the corporate targets, which are driving a lot of leases at the moment. So say, for example, governments have just mandated that they want electrified buildings and 5.5-star neighbours ratings for their offices in metro. And so therefore, a lot of the commercial assets currently won't have those type of high performance ratings, and they won't meet those targets. Construction costs and interest rates, I'm sure you're very familiar with this problem. There's growing digital demands. People want a smarter, more up-to-date building. There's a reduced commercial demand since COVID. A lot of us aren't going into the offices. Flexible work's being big, and that's across all of Australia. Changing workplace expectations. We've got a new breed of millennials and Gen Zs wanting a different workplace to, say, the open plan, expansive, quite predictable office space of the future. And then there's this other thing, which is, do we have the wrong building stock currently for the needs moving forward? Do we need a lot more houses and a lot less buildings because the vacancy rate's so high? So basically the vacancy rate in Australia is at its highest point since the early 90s, which I'm sure some people remember. And basically there's a lot of empty office spaces. And this is the vacancy rate where you've got unleased floors of buildings and unleased tenancies. But on top of that, we've also got leased tenancies where only half the staff members are turning up. And so this is a problem that a lot of real estate agents, we talk to people like JLL and CBRE, and they're seeing this commercial office slump lasting for the next 5+ years. So it's not going to be quickly fixed. And there's a lot of companies still downsizing. And because of this, commercial offices, not just the net face rents are dropping at the moment, but the amount of incentives that are given to people to move into office spaces are going crazy at the moment. So you've actually got building owners offering to pay for the fit outs as an incentive to make sure they've got the ongoing leases. So like office asset owners are desperate for tenants at the moment. And then on the other flip side, we've got a housing crisis. So I basically just Googled Australian housing crisis, and the amount of news just in the last few days is massive. So it's big across all of it. And Adelaide, I think, actually has a higher office vacancy rate than the Australian average. I don't have some data on the housing of Adelaide, but I'm sure you're in a similar predicament. So what to do with our commercial buildings? So it's pretty clear there are kind of two overarching statements in my mind, is there aren't enough commercial net zero and modern buildings with good ESG to satisfy commercial demand. So the top end of the market's still moving into these fancy buildings, but the bottom end, the Bs and C classes, if you go by PCA ratings, are really struggling. And then the other one is we're in a housing crisis and there are empty offices ready to convert. So we've got these options for an upgrade to basically either electrify it and make it more efficient, improve its functionality, or we can change it into something else, which could be living. So we've got a lot of examples of trying to revitalise these buildings throughout Australia. So if you haven't been following what's been happening with electrification in Australia, it was really slow a few years ago, but it's now gone crazy. Basically, all of Dexus's commercial portfolios is being electrified and uplifted. We're seeing it in universities. We're seeing it in like Federation Square. We're seeing it in hotels. We're seeing this demand for upgraded buildings across Australia. And basically, even though this isn't the topic of the conversation, it goes to show that the existing Bs and Cs aren't meeting the demands of what we need today. And so they'll probably struggle to keep their tenants as we move into the next decade. So these two ones, though, are the topic of this presentation. And these are two buildings that used to be commercial offices. And we've got some good before and after shots coming up, as well as we'll talk you through what transition we had. But basically the entire frames for these buildings was kept and they were converted into residential. And we'll go through those case studies at the end. So big picture opportunities. Why does commercial to resi make sense? First of all, residential buildings don't convert well to commercial, so you can't go the other way. And the reason why is residential buildings have less structural loading. They've got less weight on them. So their structure's weaker than commercial buildings. So commercial can take residential, but not the other way around. The thing is, commercial offices are actually built to really good structural loading, that when we convert a commercial office building to a residential building, we can typically add one lightweight floor for every like 4 or 5 floors of commercial building without actually strengthening the structure, because the structural loading's so big. The other thing is there's normally like there's just benefits across the board with this conversion. The plant rooms of commercial buildings are really large compared to residential, and they're not often double height. So if you've got a cooling tower might be 6 meters high and there'll be a plant screen around it. However, that could be converted into, without even changing the envelope, into 2 floors of residential. Then you've got a reduced planning risk. A lot of councils are trying to pro this conversion for a few reasons. First of all, the envelope already exists, so you're not intruding onto other properties' views or daylight. But also, a lot of CBDs are dead on the weekends. And the introduction of living can actually help revitalise a community and support the surrounding areas. So in terms of the facades, a lot of people are worried about the quality of some commercial facades, but in a lot of cases, you've got to strip the facade off with any of these conversions anyway, because you've got to bring it up to a modern facade to meet the NCC regulations in terms of you're changing of use, and so therefore you've got to upgrade the entire facade. So it's very unlikely that you can keep a commercial facade as part of a conversion. Another nice thing about commercial buildings, they've normally got good views and they're in great locations, which is obviously works quite well. They've often close to public transport. And the other thing is they've often got existing basements. So you don't actually have to do excavation, and this can save on massive amounts of time. So because you can keep the entire structure, you can normally save 12 months of construction time. And so these things can get to market a lot quicker than a conventional residential area. Now, it's probably worth noting that the basement, the number of car parks is quite limiting for the size of the basement can be quite limiting for some residential properties, because a lot of residential properties want a car park. And so a small car park can be quite limiting to these type of developments. But there are some hotel models and some build to rent models where you don't actually need the car park. So sometimes you can't go directly to build to sell just because of the limitations of the basement. There's more great news with power supplies. Commercial power supplies are a lot bigger than residential power supplies. So you don't have to upgrade the substation or the utilities coming into the building. The one exception is water supplies. Residentials use more water and they have more sewer drainage. So you do have to upgrade those. And then, so some conversions you might have to, I don't know why that lead is pointing there, but for some conversions, you might have to work, if it is going to something like a hotel, you might have to improve the entry into the building quite substantially. There's also some, with these older buildings, updating the DDA access and other conversions we'll have to do. But one of the key things in actually selecting a building for conversion is you can't actually convert that many buildings which are wider than 24 metres wide. And the reason why is because if you get too deep, you don't get daylight the whole way into the footprint. And so the reason why 24 exists is, depending on where you are in Australia, a lot of councils and a lot of states have minimum depths of apartments for daylight penetration. And so if you go further than 9 metres into an apartment, so in Victoria, we've got our better design standards, which actually prevent you from going deeper with an apartment because you're afraid that you're going to not get the daylight you're going to need for good human usage. And so if you have a balcony, then you have that 9 metres, then you have an internal corridor. About 25, 26 metres is the maximum width before a floor plate gets too deep. But it's not just the actual big picture opportunities that make sense. If you think about it on an apartment scale, some of the great things are that commercial offices have really big lift cores and they have really big, so commercial offices need more lifts than residential buildings. And this is because commercial buildings actually have more people in a given area and they all arrive at 8:30 to 9 in the morning. They all go out for lunch at the same time, where the residential's a lot more staggered. So you can delete off lift cores and free up more space, subject to structural analysis, because that's part of the core structure of a building. The other thing is commercial offices also have big VAV systems and air conditioning systems. They've got bigger smoke spill systems and zone pressurization systems. And these things end up being really big riser space. So you can actually grab a lot of riser space back when you make a conversion from commercial to resi. And we've found that you can normally get about 50 metres squared per floor on a typical office floor plate back from the lifts and the risers. So there's a lot of hidden area that you might not see in just the NLA of the building. One of the best things is commercial buildings have really good floor to floors. A typical commercial building is about a 3.7 floor to floor, give or take a couple of 100 mil. And then a typical apartment might be only 3.1, 3.2 floor to floor. And what this means is we've actually got premium apartments here. And one of the big challenges we've got is there's a big wealth disparity with age groups at the moment. There's a lot of rich boomers who want to downsize, but they want a product which they see as a similar level of amenity and feel and luxury. And so therefore these really high ceilings can actually lead to a really premium product rather than the mass build to sell model that we're seeing, which is get the cheapest thing you can build onto the market, and then the people who are just trying to get on the ladder take them. So this opens the door up for actually better light fittings, so you can have more pendants, you can have more ceiling fans, you can hide air conditioning ducts better, you can run them to the perimeter where you want them to discharge, because that's where the heat load is, rather than throwing it across from well back in the apartment. Because of the height, you can consolidate drainage stacks, so you need less drainage stacks through the building compared to a conventional build. You can have taller windows, which means better daylight penetration. What else? Some of the other things which are considered here is you do need to work on acoustic separation, because a lot of commercial buildings are designed for commercial offices noises. And this goes both between floors and also to the exterior. So one thing we'll talk about a little bit here is a lot of commercial buildings are made with a sealed facade, as in they've got solid fixed windows. But if you live in an apartment, you like the idea of being able to open up your doors, go out onto the balcony. And so therefore you might have to select where these conversions take place. And what else? You can easily electrify them as well. So you can put induction cooktops in, people can have EV chargers, and you can electrify the building, which is great for climate change, because the commercial substations and commercial power supplies to the buildings are already oversized for a residential development. Daylight. So we've done some studies with daylight. Is normally a typical mass build apartment only has about a 2.4 meter floor ceiling in it. And because of sort of design standards, a lot of times, like I said, like most states limit the depth of apartment to 8 to 9 meters because they don't think there's enough daylight. But there's an option here to actually do bigger apartments, because the actual daylight penetration in is so much better with larger, higher windows. And so we're actually finding that there's an argument that you could do larger scale apartments than what you normally could, and expand that 24 meter, 25 meter depth width building, and possibly look at slightly further and challenge those mandatory requirements that they've made for the cheap build to sell model. The other one is carbon. About 65% of the embodied carbon of a building is in the structure, the substructure, and the foundations. And so therefore, if you're keeping the structure, and a lot of these buildings, what we're doing is we're removing the facade, and then we're putting a new facade on. We've got conversions with both bolt-on balconies and also inset balconies that we'll show you in a second. But the thing is, you can keep 60% of the embodied carbon of this building, which is massive. Especially the greenest buildings now aren't the new shiny buildings popping up in the CBD. The newest buildings are kept buildings which are electrified and made efficient. And so these are actually going to be the retrofits like this are going to be the most sustainable option we've got as society in terms of building new buildings. Other considerations, regulations and compliance. When you change of use in the NCC, you've got to take the entire building up to the modern code. So therefore your building surveyor will no doubt require you to take the whole building up to code. And so therefore you will have new facades typically on most developments, but you'll also have new sprinkler systems, new fire safety, and you'll have to go through the full fire review as you go through it. So council and zoning, if there is a change in use, most councils around Australia require you to go through planning again. We're hoping that the City of Adelaide will be favourable to these type of developments, and we'll be able to rush them through a little bit more, given the envelope's the same, and also there's the housing crisis as well, and there are struggling commercial office buildings. So we're hoping for a bit of dispensation from that across the board. Fire safety. So commercial offices and residential both require 2 stairs and to be fully sprinkled above 25 metres. You've also, with residential, if you're above 4 stories residential, you've got to be sprinkled. And so there is sometimes a conversion between 4 and 25 metres, 4 stories and 25 metres, where you do have to put in a brand new sprinkler system. The good news is above 25 metres though, is the sprinkler system for commercials actually bigger than the sprinkler system for residential. So chances are it can be reused. So there's a bit of a pro and con there, depending on what level your building is. Acoustics, like I said, you've got to select the right area. You will be moving from a closed facade to an open facade. In some cases, also, you'll have a commercial building which wasn't made for acoustic separation. So there might be some remediation there. And the other thing is managing contractor risk. Contractors are scared of existing buildings. A lot of contractors know how to demolish a building and build a new building, or the majority do, and they do build in over risk here. So we're hoping the more that these go through, the cheaper they'll become, because there are some great case studies of retrofits, not just commercial to living, but across the board. They're scared of the unknown unknowns, like what could be in the structure, is there asbestos that has to be cleared, things like that. But a lot of commercial buildings, which are going to be demolished anyway, need to have a specialist asbestos removal before they're demolished. So you're still paying for that regardless. So we've seen some cost plans which said, don't do this. The asbestos is going to be really expensive, and you're better off demolishing it. But then we looked at like the cost plan for demolishing it, and they had to remove the asbestos anyway. So we're hoping for some more developed and more clever cost plans to come through to support this. So the 2 case studies I just wanted to show you is this one in 499 St Kilda Road, which is a conversion of an old commercial office building. You can see the facade coming off, and then you can see it in residential form here. And it went through all those ideas there. What we were able to see really quickly was you can remove the lift shafts. You can actually make the core a lot less and the plant a lot less. And the regular grid really works well with the apartment layouts. And then this one as well on 14 Queens Road, where we removed the structure and then extended the building. And on both of those occasions, the structure had so much loading that we were able to actually put pools at high level without any structural reinforcement. And the result is completed conversions. Both of those case studies completely sold out, and they've ended up being like bought by premium live-in occupiers because they really like the high floor-to-floor ceilings, and you don't feel like you're in a conventional apartment. And that's it.
That is amazing, Alex. Thank you so much. So if you don't mind, we might just go through some of those questions. Is that you mentioned saving 12 months of construction time because you're using the structure, but how much planning time do you think is saved through this approach?
This is like unfortunately, incredibly subjective. So in the city of Melbourne, we've been promised, because they're really worried about their high level of Bs and Cs, which are poorly tenanted. And I'm sure Adelaide's exactly the same. But we've been having really productive conversations with the city of Melbourne about that. And they were saying this is one of the great options for fast tracking the planning process. So if you get the city on board, we're planning to talk to the City of Adelaide about this a little bit more. But most cities around Australia, if they see the need for it, this would make sense as a fast-tracked planning. So it is a change of, it does have to go through planning because it's a change of use. So the answer is it goes on a case by case, and you'd have to start quite a good, you'd have to somehow convince them. So sorry about that.
Can you talk about cost to convert approximately per square meter rate? Like for example, would this be good for affordable housing or maybe build to rent?
Yeah, so we think we've had I don't have the cost per square meter rate, but I do have sort of the percentage reduction in cost compared to a new build. Now, the percentage in reduction of cost is actually quite small from talking to QSs, unfortunately, because they were saying that it's probably only sort of 10% in costs or 15% in costs. So it's not actually that much. In terms of if you were building the structure from scratch, you could save 30% if you wanted to. But the thing is, if you're comparing like 3.5 to 4 meter floor to floor versus a new build, and also it's the contractor risk of this. So there are savings to be had, but not as much. One of the savings though as well is just time to market. If you're able to get to time to market with high interest rates and high cost, then that'll save you a lot as well. And it will get you a return a lot quicker if it's build to sell or build or whatever the mechanism is. But we do think to do the equivalent, it could be up to 30%, but no one would build a new resi development with 4 meter floor to floors on them. So it's a tough one to say, but there are, especially in the older generations, what we've found, they really rate floor to ceiling height as a mark of quality, and how it's very hard to know what the cost premium is on these developments.
Are there any projects like these in or being planned or in Adelaide or South Australia?
So no, not that we're aware of. So this is sort of a recent phenomenon. Like these ones were done in 2019, both in Melbourne. They both had good views of parks, which I'm sure helped the build to sell option. But we do see this as a trend that just makes sense in a lot of capital cities around Australia. There's been so many news articles about it. We're not aware of it. We'd love to be involved. If there was a poorly tenanted office building with views of a park, that would just make sense. So
I don't think they probably are.
Yeah.
There's a lot of parks to be seen in Adelaide, you know.
Yeah,
That's right.
National
So-
Park City.
Yeah,
Every
so-
direction.
sorry, stupid question by the Melburnian. So the answer is it to us, it makes sense that this should be looked at. We've got the wrong building stock, and there's a premium product at the end of it. And they're in great location, especially if you've got great locations and you've got a poorly tenanted building and you don't see it being well tenanted in the next 10 years or so. Like if you're an asset owner, I think it's a great option.
Yeah.
I think there's heaps of opportunity in South
Yeah,
Australia.
I think so too. Yeah. So Daniel just asked about the toilets and wet areas. Considering the commercial areas generally have less, only 1 or 2 in each area.
Yeah.
You provide that increased amount.
Yeah. So in a typical apartment building, apartments have, most of the time their wet areas will be towards the central core or the central corridor and not towards the facade. The great thing about the high floor to floors is you can consolidate drainage stacks and take them down, but you will have to penetrate them. Sometimes you've got tensioning, post-tensioning or pre-tensioning in concrete. So it has to be carefully considered. But the great news is you can actually offset them. Whether in a typical apartment, what you do is you've got most newer builds have a flat slab, and whether commercial buildings often have beams. And so in that beam space, we can actually run it across. So there are definitely options there. On a job I worked in London for a while, they actually built up the floor for underfloor heating and also to do the acoustics. And they were able to take some of the showers across in that as well. So not even in the floor below, only a small span, but there are some options to do some stuff because they wanted the acoustics as well.
Yeah, and that would be great because you're reducing penetration into the existing structure.
Yeah.
David just made a comment. This makes sense from a technical point of view, but property industry and others push for new apartment towers. I reckon limits to embodied carbon are required, and in carbon budget will favour adaptive reuse and conversions. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually.
Yeah, totally agree. Just the one point I'd say on that is most cities around Australia are moving towards mandating 5-star Green Star for CBDs. And the great thing about that is that actually will have a price on embodied carbon in it. So if you've got to get a significant development built in most CBDs now, you've got to meet a Green Star requirement, which now requires you to limit your embodied carbon and then offset the remaining. So at least there's a beginning to be a price on carbon, even though offsets are incredibly problematic and not the way to deal with stuff.
Thanks, Alex. I was going to whip in a little question from me regarding the depth of the buildings. And you're limited to 24 metres because of the light aspect, although you may have an argument for greater depth because of greater window height. I'm wondering if you did have an extra space in deeper buildings, could they be used for community areas, like not specifically apartment, but just general community areas like community libraries or little playground or something, is that a doable thing?
Oh, absolutely. You can mechanically ventilate internal areas. You can also add things like light wells into buildings with deeper floor plates. So this is the direct conversion, but you can be a lot more creative. And I'm sure there's an architect or two on the call who probably has a few light bulbs going off, but you definitely can convert it. Maybe storage on your floor could be another option as well, because apartments always have a problem. So the other thing is you can have like multiple bin chutes because you're freeing up all this riser space as well. So there are some other options as well. Some of the apartments we've looked at in central CBDs is there's also been, you've got enough lift shafts to do like hotel at the lower levels where you don't have enough daylight for permanent residents. And then you have one of the ones was like key workers in the middle or temporary accommodation. And then on the top, you could do penthouses with, if you wanted to go ultra premium, you could have like lift access to those as well. But that's not really my thing I'm passionate about as much. But there are a lot of flexibility because you've actually got the lift shafts already there. Having said that though, the premium penthouse apartments do go for about twice the price per square metre and may make a development feasible and allow the entire thing to get over the line. So we were seeing that with one case study in Melbourne as well.
So going on from that, it kind of brings us to Priscilla's questions about the apartments becoming more marketable because of the sustainable living elements and reduced embodied carbon savings.
I hope so. It's hard to say. At the moment, like the only thing sustainable which you hear about with apartments is whether the building's a Green Star building, which normally means it's brand new, or it's got a high NAFAS rating. But none of these take into account embodied carbon. So something has to change because you're not actually saying this. Having said that though, the structure on these buildings, is going to work. So you won't have those, if you've been following some New South Wales and Queensland stories at the moment, there's some questionable developments occurring. So maybe there's some benefits in actually having something which is a bit more robust and understood. And the weird thing with concrete is it actually hardens over time a lot of the time. So you might be actually better off with an older structure than a new one.
So just sort of following on from that, and I am jumping a bit here, but because it follows on, can just ask, due to the extra loading in the structure, do you think there are more opportunities for integrating green infrastructure at the top or at different levels of commercial to have accessible green space for people? Is
this on commercial buildings?
To residential.
Oh, sorry, in the conversion.
In the conversion. Yeah, absolutely. So like I said before, you can normally add one floor for every, if you're converting the whole building to resi, you can normally add one floor for every 4.5 floors, just because of the residual structural loading, and commercials takes on a lot more plant and a lot more weight and a lot more people. And so because of that, you can do whatever you want with that. Or you might have I don't know, if you work with engineers, you'll know that we normally add a safety factor on. Sometimes it's even more. So you can put lightweight structure on top for extra floors, or you can green the room, green it. You can add amenity. You could add some deep garden beds, which normally you couldn't do. So, well, we've seen pools go on. So you're limited by your creativity, I guess, yeah?
Yeah, sounds like it. That's great. I'll just read out some comments that some people have made. Andrew Davidson has just commented that there's additional cost involving in dismantling commercial title arrangements to community titles, which need to be considered.
Yeah.
And also David Ness just commented that we do have past examples here. We've got the Peppers Hotel, Weymouth Street was an office.
Oh, brilliant.
Uni House corner, which is on the corner of Rundle Mall and Pulteney Street. That there was also the Watson in Walkerville, WATSON in Walkerville.
Yeah, by the way, at no point did we like invent the conversion from commercial to resi or to living. It's more that it's coming about as these are two recent examples which kind of hit the I don't know, the zeitgeist, I guess, of commercial in trouble, resi needed world. So that's really great. Because the more case studies we have, especially if they've got these premium results, we just want people not to do it on a square meter basis. It's actually there needs to be almost an uplift, because the results, if you just Google these type of developments, the results just look so much better than a conventional apartment.
Yeah.
Hey, Andrew,
Yep.
your comment around dismantling commercial title into community titles, could you kind of explain that for us, if that's all right, if you don't mind speaking into your mic?
Yes, well, typical commercial properties, quite often, like Alex has said, have lease arrangements, not necessarily titles. Some of them, and I have done a few where there are whole floors that just have their own title per floor in a commercial building, whereas what would be necessary is for whoever owns the building, and it's probably a corporate body, that would actually have to adjust, alter, possibly even cancel their old title arrangements and convert that back into community residential lot titles. It's just a degree of complexity that would be part of it, but it's something that certainly would form part of it. And titles are more important for a residential development than they are really for a commercial one. So I just raised it as something that would need to be considered, probably, depending what the developer was wanting to do.
Yeah. Absolutely. We do see quite a few strata titled offices, like floor by floor ownership, as well as the total one title building as well.
There are a number of others, such as the former EPSA building on Greenhill Road.
And I was actually wondering, Alex, about EV charging and the potential for electric vehicle charging in these buildings. You've mentioned that, there's spare capacity for power because it's greater power needs for commercial enterprises than there are generally for residential. Have you sort of given some thought, or do you know what happens if EV charging is added into the mix there?
Well, there's a couple of models for it. So if it's build to rent or aged care, then you can do it conventionally, where you this works a lot better because you actually have a central load management box. So basically the power goes into that load management, and then that will ramp up and down by how much power you've got available. So if there's not a big draw on the building at the moment, you can charge all the cars as fast as you want. But if there is a big draw and you're approaching your supply capacity, then that will actually ramp down and not charge cars. So for those models, that's really easy. We've seen a couple of different models go in to new apartment buildings. One of them's running cables down from your consumer unit, which is very expensive, and putting in individual charges. The other one is actually getting a third-party operator to come in, which residents can then charge and be billed for via anything from an embedded network to a standalone system, which is set up. But there's a lot of, we're finding there has been challenges in the past because body corporates don't want to pay for the charging of the few or the infrastructure. So they are challenging, but there are some products there out in the market which allow them. I think Jet Charge, which is another Australian-owned company, has some products which can help you, which can be installed, and then there's kind of a payback on usage rather than running cables down the whole way from consumer units to a charger.
Alex,
Jet Charge. So there's a few models for it.
Alrighty.
Yeah, maybe we can shoot this last one through.
Yeah, good opportunity for vehicle to load. So Emily was wondering if you could let us know about the apartment typologies that came out of the WTO case studies.
The 2 case studies.
Oh yeah, so a lot of premium sized apartments, so like a mixture of 1, 2, and 3. One thing that what did happen with one of them was, because it was such a premium apartment in terms of it had, I think the top floor had like 4 meters floor to floor, was we actually had very rich buyers buying penthouse apartments next to each other and combining them together, which isn't great for the housing crisis, but it goes to show that they were very much sought after.
Yeah.
So take the premium result out of that rather than the combining. But that happened quite at least a couple of times on the Faulkner Park job, the ones that looked over Faulkner Park.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so Alexandra has just made a comment there that allowing vehicle to grid, and I think someone else made the comment as well that there's opportunity for vehicle to grid.
Yeah.
There is, I mean, there's a lot of chatter at the moment about whether, because EV battery supplying to the grid actually lowers the it doesn't destruct the battery, but it lowers the capacity of the battery, or the life, I should say. That's the word I'm looking for. It lowers the life of the battery. And I don't know if that comes under warranty or if there are new models coming out that are better for vehicle to grid. But at the moment, there's a lot of chatter about whether vehicle to grid is actually something that can be done that will still allow the battery the life that it, that it was supposed to have. So
I'm hearing equal parts warnings and equal parts optimism on this matter.
Yeah,
but
same.
I think we'll get there would be the answer, and it will eventually be a thing, and people will be paid for having a battery to charge if they're happy to have their battery drained to 80% or 70%, then they'll get a fee for it. We're going to get there. It's just, I think the technology and the systems are catching up, and the regulations aren't there either. So there's a lot of, I don't know, the big grids at the moment don't want to relinquish their control over it for small scale generation. And we're finding there's roadblocks in regulations, existing setups, existing monopolies, a bit of technology. I think we'll get there, but it will take a bit of time. Is my feel on it. And I think the technology's kind of there at the moment. It just, there's a lot of little roadblocks before we actually get it widely spread.
Yeah. Yep. Bit of a transition period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All righty.
Cool.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating. And clearly our listeners thought so too.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think it's time to wrap up.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much. And I think also it's very relevant for Adelaide because we do have a lot of opportunity to convert some commercial spaces into resi spaces.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we'd love to help. We've got our Adelaide office, which I support nationally, but we want to do more of these. We think they're the most sustainable buildings you can do, and they address some social issues as well. So let us know if you spot any absolute great ones.
Yeah, fabulous.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for jumping on and listening in and for your comments and questions. Excellent. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. And cheers.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Have a great day.